My front border bloomed for 34 consecutive weeks last year, late March through the middle of November. No annuals, no replanting. I have not touched that border with a trowel since I planted the last piece of it in the fall of 2020. The total cost to establish it was roughly $180. In that same stretch of time, my neighbor across the street, and I love her, she is a wonderful gardener in her own way, has spent over $900 on annuals. $900 for color that starts in June and ends in September. 4 months. I get 8.5 months for free now, every single year, because the plants just come back. And the plant that carries my garden through October and November, the one that blooms when every other garden on my street has gone brown and bare. Most people walk right past it at the nursery. It is not exotic. It is not expensive. It is just invisible in spring because it does not start blooming until September. I will get to that one later. I have been designing perennial borders for over 30 years. The first 10 of those years, I designed them wrong. I loaded everything into June. My garden looked like a magazine cover for 4 weeks, and then looked like an abandoned lot for the next 8 months. I once planted 3 varieties that all peaked the same week. The whole border erupted in color for about 20 days, and then went completely silent until the following spring. Design genius. It took me a decade to understand that a perennial border is not a collection of pretty flowers. It is a relay race. One plant finishes blooming and hands off to the next, and the next hands off to the one after that. And if you choose the right 15 plants and put them in the right sequence, no week goes dark from the last frost of spring to the first hard freeze of fall. That is what I want to walk you through today. Not just which plants to buy, you can find that anywhere, but the specific sequence, which blooms first, which fills the gap in July when the spring flowers are done, which carries you through September and October when every other garden on the block has quit. By the time we finish, you will know exactly how to build a border that hands off color month to month for 34 weeks without replanting a single thing. And there is something later on this list. A $4 grocery store plant that almost everyone buys the wrong version of. That I saved because once you understand the difference, you will never look at a fall garden display the same way again. My husband tolerated the sparse first year when I converted our front border from annuals. He looked at it and said it looked thin. That was 5 years ago. He has since admitted, more than once, that it is the best thing I have ever done to this property. If you are finding this useful as we go, I would appreciate it if you passed it along to someone whose garden could use the same information. Now here is the thing nobody tells you when you walk into the garden centre every April. The nursery is not trying to deceive you. They are good people selling beautiful plants. But annuals guarantee you come back every spring. Every flat of petunias is a subscription. Every tray of impatiens is a recurring charge. And nobody on that staff makes money by pointing to a gallon pot of coneflower and saying this will bloom every summer for the next 20 years, so you will never need to buy another one. That conversation does not happen, not because anyone is dishonest, because the business model does not reward it. I did it myself for 12 years. 12 springs of loading my cart with impatiens and marigolds and begonias. They would look beautiful in June, leggy by August, dead by October. And every March I would do the whole thing over again as if the previous year had not happened. Seasonal amnesia. That is what it is. You forget the disappointment every winter and start fresh every spring with the same temporary plants. Here is what I wish someone had shown me in my first year of gardening. Not a list of pretty perennials. A calendar. A bloom calendar that shows you which plant blooms in which week, so you can design a border where something is always flowering. That is the difference between a garden that peaks in June and dies, and a garden that blooms for 34 weeks. The plants themselves are not unusual. You have seen most of them. You may already grow some of them. The sequencing is everything. And the gap between blooms, that dead space in July when the spring flowers are finished and the late summer plants have not yet started, is where most perennial gardens fail. Not because the plants are difficult, because nobody designed for the handoff. Everything I'm about to show you blooms before midsummer. These first 3 plants are the early spring colour, the ones that wake up your garden while everything else is still bare. They are cheap, they are easy, and they reward you the very first year. But the next 5 plants after them are what carry a garden from midsummer through September. And one of them, an $8 daylily, will give you 5 months of bloom from a single plant. Let me start at the beginning of the season. Number 1 is creeping phlox. This is the first real colour in my garden every year. It blooms in March and April, produces a dense carpet of pink or purple flowers, so thick you cannot see the foliage underneath, and it spills over walls, edges, stone borders. Anywhere you give it a hard line to cascade over. It grows about 6 inches tall and spreads about 2 feet wide. Full sun, zones 3 through 9, which means it grows practically everywhere in this country. I planted mine along the top of a low stone wall 7 years ago, and every March it pours over that wall like someone spilled paint. The rest of the garden is still brown, still waking up. And this one plant announces that the season has started. It is the signal that 34 weeks of colour are about to begin. Number 2 is dianthus, pink and red flower clusters, sometimes bicolour, blooming from April through June. The fragrance is what gets you first, clove-scented, sweet, and it carries across the yard on a warm afternoon. Grows about 12 inches tall, full sun, zones 3 through 9. Deer leave it alone completely, which if you garden anywhere near woods, you understand how rare that is. I have a friend down the road who planted a row of dianthus along her front walkway 4 years ago. It comes back thicker and fuller every spring. She has never divided it, never fertilized it, never done anything except watch it bloom. That is the kind of plant a perennial border is built on, the kind that rewards you for doing absolutely nothing. Number 3 is catmint, and the variety you want is called Walker's Low. Lavender blue flower spikes from May all the way through September. That is 5 months from one plant. It grows about 2 feet tall, forms a loose, billowy mound, and here is the thing most people miss about catmint. When the first flush of flowers fades in midsummer, you cut the whole plant back by half, and it reblooms within 3 weeks. A full second wave of flowers from a plant that already gave you 2 months of bloom. Full sun, zones 3 through 8. It is one of the longest bloomers on this entire list, and it transitions your border from early spring into summer without a gap. I have 6 of them along the front edge of my border, and they stitch the whole season together like thread through a quilt. Now, everything I have shown you so far is spring and early summer. These are the plants that open the relay. But here is where your mental model of a perennial garden needs to shift. The question is no longer which plants are pretty. The question is which plants fill the specific weeks that would otherwise be empty. Most perennial gardens fail in July and August, not because the summer plants are hard to grow, but because nobody planned for the handoff. The spring bloomers finish, and the border goes quiet for 6 weeks because nothing was chosen to fill that gap. The gap between bloomers is the real problem, not the bloomers themselves. These next 5 plants are the summer powerhouses. Each one earns its place not just by being beautiful, but by covering a specific window of the calendar that would otherwise go dark. Number 4 is coneflower, echinacea. Pink, purple, or white daisy-shaped blooms on sturdy stems from June through September. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall, full sun, zones 3 through 9. Butterflies treat it like a landing pad. On a warm July afternoon, I have counted a dozen of them working a single coneflower patch. It self-seeds gently, which means every year you get a few new plants for free without it becoming invasive. I planted 3 coneflower crowns 6 years ago along the middle of my border. They have filled a 12-foot stretch and they bloom for 4 solid months without a single input from me. The cost was $24. Coneflower is the backbone of every perennial border I have ever designed. If you plant one thing from this list, this is the one. Number 5 is Black-Eyed Susan, Rudbeckia. Bright, golden yellow petals with a dark chocolate center, blooming from June all the way through October. That is 5 months of unbroken color. Grows 2 to 3 feet tall, full sun to part shade, zones 3 through 9. After year 1, this plant asks nothing from you. Nothing. No fertilizer, no deadheading, no division. It spreads gently to fill gaps between other plants. And by year 3, it weaves itself into the border like it was always there. My neighbour calls it the plant that glows. In late afternoon sunlight, when the Rudbeckia catches the light next to the coneflower, the whole border lights up gold and pink. That combination alone is worth the price of both plants. And it happens every day for 4 months without you lifting a finger. Number 6 is the Stella d'Oro daylily. Golden yellow blooms from May through September. 5 months from a single plant that costs about $8 at any nursery in the country. It grows about 12 inches tall, full sun to part shade, zones 3 through 9. The key is choosing a reblooming variety, and Stella d'Oro is the standard for a reason. It blooms, pauses briefly, and blooms again, over and over, from late spring into fall. Most daylilies give you 3 weeks. This one gives you 5 months. A woman down the road from me started with 3 Stella d'Oros in her front yard. She now has a border that people stop their cars to photograph, and every single plant in it came from dividing those original 3. The original investment was about $24. The current garden is worth hundreds. That is what perennials do. They multiply your money while you sleep. Number 7 is Russian sage. And this one I want you to see in your mind before I say anything else. Picture a plant 3 to 4 feet tall with silvery white stems and clouds, actual clouds, of tiny lavender blue flowers that bloom from July through September. From across the yard, it looks like a watercolor painting. Up close, it smells like sage and hums with bees. Full sun, zones 4 through 9. It is essentially drought-proof once established, and it fills the back of a border with that hazy blue-purple color that makes everything planted in front of it look better. The golden coneflowers in front of Russian sage, the white shastas against that blue haze. It is the backdrop plant, the one that turns a good border into a designed garden. We are halfway through this list, and I need to tell you that we have not reached the part I find most beautiful. The fall bloomers. The plants that carry a garden through September, October, and November when everything else has quit. And the beauty of these plants is not just that they bloom late, it is that they bloom against the death of everything around them. Green fading to brown, leaves dropping, neighbours raking. And in the middle of it all, your border is still alive with colour that feels almost defiant. One of these fall plants, and this is one I think about more than any other plant I grow, looks better dead than most plants look alive. I will explain exactly what I mean by that in a moment. But first, number 8 is the Shasta daisy. Classic white petals with a sunny yellow centre, blooming from June through August. 2 feet tall, full sun, zones 4 through 9. This is the flower that every single person recognizes. Your neighbour sees it and thinks garden. Your mother-in-law sees it and says that is lovely. It is the friendly, familiar face of a perennial border, and here is the practical reason I love it. Shasta daisies divide more easily than almost any perennial I grow. You split one clump in fall, replant the divisions 18 inches apart, and by next summer you have filled another 4 feet of border for free. I have populated an entire section of my garden with Shastas descended from 2 original plants I bought in 2019. The only cost was 15 minutes with a shovel. That is how a perennial border fills itself in, not by buying more plants, by letting the plants you have become more plants. Now we cross into fall, and I want you to understand something about what comes next, because it changes how you think about garden beauty entirely. The plants I have shown you so far bloom when gardens are supposed to bloom, spring and summer. That is when the world expects flowers. Colour in June is easy. Every garden on every street has some version of it. The plants I am about to show you bloom when gardens are supposed to be dying. And that contrast, bright, living colour against the fading brown of everything around it, creates a beauty that summer blooms simply cannot match. The best perennial gardens do not peak in June. They peak when other gardens die. This is where a garden becomes something people remember. Number 9 is sedum, and the variety is autumn joy. It begins blooming in August, with flat clusters of soft pink flowers at the top of thick, succulent stems, about 2 feet tall. Through September, those pink blooms darken to rose. Through October, they deepen to rust red. And in November, after the frost has killed almost everything else in the garden, those flower heads turn a deep mahogany brown and hold their shape all winter. They look architectural. They look intentional. Against a backdrop of snow, they look like sculpture. Sedum autumn. Joy is the only perennial I know that looks better dead than most plants look alive. Full sun, zones 3 through 9, and once you plant it, you will never pull it out because there is no month of the year when it is not doing something beautiful. In summer, it is green and structural. In fall, it is pink, turning to rust. In winter, it is standing there, dignified, while everything else has collapsed around it. Number 10 is Japanese anemone. And this is the one I teased at the very beginning. The plant most people walk right past. Here is why they miss it. Japanese anemone is invisible in spring. It is a clump of unremarkable green foliage all summer long. If you visit a nursery in April or May, looking for something in bloom, you would never look twice at it. You would walk right past its pot and pick up a petunia instead. But in September, when your neighbour's garden has faded to brown and your summer perennials are finishing their last blooms, Japanese anemone sends up slender stems 3 feet tall and opens delicate pink or white flowers that dance in the slightest breeze. They look like they belong in a painting. They bloom through September and October, zones 4 through 8, part shade to full sun. This is the plant that makes people stop on the sidewalk and ask, what is that? It is not hidden. It is not rare. It is widely available at any good nursery in this country. The reason people do not plant it is simple. They shop in spring, when this plant is nothing to look at. They buy what is blooming on the shelf that day. And they miss the most elegant thing their fall garden could ever have. You have to trust that September is coming. You have to buy the plant that gives you nothing for 5 months and then gives you everything. Number 11 is asters. Purple, blue, or pink daisy-like flowers in dense clusters, blooming from September all the way through November. They grow 2 to 4 feet tall, depending on variety, full sun, zones 3 through 8. Asters are the closer. They are the final performer in the relay. When the coneflowers are done, when the Rudbeckia is spent, when even the sedum has gone to its winter sculpture, the asters are still blooming. They carry a garden to the first hard frost, and their colour, particularly the deep purple varieties planted next to the gold of spent Rudbeckia seed heads, is unlike anything else available that late in the season. My asters are the last thing blooming on my street every year. My neighbour asked me last November how I still had colour in my garden. She was raking leaves. I was still looking at flowers. That is the difference asters make. Number 12 is the hardy garden mum. And I need to make a distinction here that most people have never heard, and it might be the most important thing I say in this entire video. There are two kinds of chrysanthemums in this world. The ones you buy at the grocery store for $4 in a pot wrapped in foil. Those are florist mums. They are bred for one spectacular indoor display. You plant them outside and they die over winter. Every single time. I have watched people do this year after year. Buy the same $4 mum every September, stick it in the ground, lose it by January, and buy it again the next fall. That is an annual dressed up as a perennial. But hardy garden mums, true perennial chrysanthemums, are a completely different plant. Same flower shape, completely different genetics, and completely different lifespan. You plant them in spring, give them full sun and well-drained soil, zones 5 through 9, and they bloom every September through frost in shades of yellow, orange, deep burgundy, and rust. They come back the following year bigger and more floriferous. And the year after that. And the year after that. I have had mine for 7 years. The difference between the $4 grocery store mum that dies in December and a real perennial mum that returns for a decade is knowing which one to buy in the first place. It is the same flower. It is not the same plant. If you planted just the 12 plants I have covered, you would have bloom from March to November. 12 plants, 9 months, no replanting. But I have not shown you the last 3, and they add something none of the others do. You can eat them. Your border can be beautiful and functional at the same time, and I still have not shown you how to arrange all 15, front to back, short to tall. So the whole border works as one designed system rather than a random collection of perennials. That is coming. Number 13 is lavender. Purple flower spikes, June through August, growing about 2 feet tall in full sun, zones 5 through 9. The fragrance alone earns it a place in any border. On a warm day, you can smell it from 10 feet away. But here is what makes lavender a bonus. The flowers are edible. You can clip them and drop them into lemonade, bake them into shortbread, dry them for sachets that last all winter. And bees treat a lavender plant like it is the only restaurant in town. I have watched a single lavender bush host 20 or 30 bees at the same time, all of them too busy to care that I was standing right there with my clippers. It is a pollinator magnet that also happens to be one of the most beautiful plants in the border. Number 14 is chives. Purple pom-pom flowers in May and June, about 12 inches tall, full sun to part shade, zones 3 through 9. The flowers are edible. The greens are edible. You snip what you need for the kitchen and the plant does not even notice. It grows right back. Chives spread gently through the border, never aggressively, filling in small gaps between other plants with those cheerful purple spheres that complement everything around them. And it is genuinely one of the most indestructible plants I have ever grown. I inherited a patch of chives when I bought my house. They had been growing untended for at least 5 years. Nobody watered them. Nobody divided them. Nobody did anything. They did not care. They were blooming when I moved in, and they are still blooming now. Number 15 is ever-bearing strawberries, white flowers in spring that give way to red fruit from May through October. They grow about 8 inches tall and spread as ground cover, zones 3 through 8, full sun. You get beauty, food, and ground cover from one plant. I use them along the very front edge of one section of my border, where they spill over the path and produce berries my grandchildren pick every time they visit. The white flowers are delicate and pretty in May. The red fruit is ornamental through the summer, and the low green foliage fills in the front edge of the border the way creeping phlox does on the other side. No other plant on this list does 3 jobs at once. Now I want to step back from individual plants and show you how all 15 work together as one designed system. Because this was never a list. It was a relay. And the relay only works if you place each runner in the right position. The front of the border, the first 12 inches from the edge, is where you put the low growers. Creeping phlox along the very front, spilling over whatever edge you have. Dianthus next to it. Strawberries filling the gaps between them. These are your 6 to 12-inch plants, and they give you March through June colour at ankle height. They are the welcome mat. They draw the eye in and down to the border's edge. The middle of the border, roughly 18 inches to 2.5 feet tall, is where the summer workhorses go. Coneflower, Shasta daisy, daylily, chives, catmint, lavender. These plants fill the visual center of the border and carry the bloom from May through September. This is where most of the color lives most of the year. When someone photographs your garden from the street, this is what they are photographing. The back of the border, 3 to 4 feet tall, is Russian sage, asters, sedum, Japanese anemone, and the hardy mums. These create the backdrop from July through November. They are taller, so they frame everything in front of them, and because most of them bloom late, they take over the show just as the midsection starts to wind down. They are also the plants that give your border depth. That sense of layers receding from front to back that makes a garden look intentional instead of flat. The bloom relay works like this. In March, creeping phlox opens the season at the front edge. In April, dianthus joins it. By May, catmint and daylilies and chives are blooming in the middle, while lavender is building its buds, and strawberry flowers add white along the ground. June brings coneflower, Shasta daisy, and black-eyed Susan into the center. The garden is at full summer volume. Every height, every layer, something in flower. In July, Russian sage lights up the back row with that hazy blue, and sedum starts showing its pink flower heads. August is the fullest month. Nearly everything is blooming at once. September is the handoff. The spring and summer plants are fading, but Japanese anemone appears out of nowhere. Asters open. The hardy mums ignite in burgundy and gold. October belongs to the asters, the anemones, and the sedum deepening to rust. November. And this is the part that surprises every single visitor. The asters are still going, the mums are still vivid, and the sedum flower heads stand like sculptures in the frost. No week is empty, not one. Because the relay was designed so each plant hands off to the next. That is not luck. That is not talent. That is sequencing. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I want to address something I know some of you are thinking. The first year will look sparse. It will. Every perennial garden does. There is no shortcut around this part. The first year they sleep. The second year they creep. The third year they leap. And after year 3, you cannot stop them. My garden in its first year looked like I had given up on landscaping entirely. By year 3, it looked like it had been there for a decade. The couple next door inherited a garden from the previous owners. Perennials that had been untended for 5 years. No weeding, no watering, no care of any kind. The perennials were still blooming, still coming back. That is what you are planting for. Not for this June. For every June after this, and every September and every November, for as long as you own the house, and for whoever owns it after you. I am not telling you to rip out everything this weekend. I am telling you that one border, converted this spring, will teach you everything I just described. You will watch the relay happen with your own eyes. You will see the handoff from catmint to coneflower to aster. And by the following spring, when you have not replanted a single thing and the border comes back bigger and fuller and more colourful than its first year, you will understand why I stopped buying annuals and never went back. 34 weeks. That is what my border gave me last year. I can name every week now. Week 1 was creeping phlox in late March. Week 12 was catmint re-blooming after I cut it back in July. Week 22 was Russian sage in its hazy blue prime. Week 30 was Japanese anemone, blooming alone and gorgeous in the October light. Week 34 was asters at the first hard frost in mid-November. The number has not changed since I told you at the beginning. 34 weeks. What changed is that now you know what is inside that number. Every week was carried by a specific plant, chosen for its specific bloom window, placed in a specific position in the border. It is not a garden that happens to bloom for 34 weeks. It is a garden that was designed to. One coneflower. That is where this starts. Go to your nearest nursery this weekend. Buy one coneflower in a gallon pot. It will cost you less than a flat of annuals. Plant it in the sunniest spot you have. It will bloom this summer. It will self-seed by next year. By year 3, it will have filled a space you used to replant with annuals every spring, and it will be the anchor of a border that blooms for decades. One plant, one weekend. That is the beginning. Of everything I covered today, which one are you most likely to plant first? And which month does your garden currently go bare? Which month do you look outside and see nothing blooming? Drop both answers in the comments. The bare month is always the more interesting conversation, because that is the gap we can fill. I will see you next week. There is more I want to show you.